Most people think political collapse is loud, dramatic, and impossible to miss, but the truth is far more unsettling because it usually starts quietly, behind closed doors, with a single idea that seems absurd at first and then slowly exposes something much bigger. What you're about to hear isn't just about Greenland or tariffs or immigration, it's about how power really works when loyalty is demanded but never returned, how institutions respond when fear stops working, and why a president who thrives on chaos can suddenly find himself surrounded by resistance he cannot control. This story isn't told through breaking news alerts or viral clips, but through the moments in between, the silences, the hedging statements, the quiet revolts, and the decisions that never make headlines but change everything. By the end of this video, you'll understand why what looks like political noise is actually a warning, why the most dangerous phase of power isn't its rise, but its unraveling, and why this moment matters far more than most people realize. Stay with me, because once you see the pattern, you won't be able to unsee it, and the final insight changes how this entire story should be understood. Imagine a quiet morning in Washington, the kind where the White House hallways look calm on the surface. But underneath that silence, something volatile is building. Phones buzzing in pockets, aides exchanging looks without speaking, everyone sensing that today is not going to be normal. And somewhere inside that building, Donald Trump is once again circling an idea that refuses to leave his mind, an idea that sounds absurd to the outside world but feels powerful to him, Greenland. And in that moment, what begins as a foreign policy headline quietly transforms into something much bigger, a story about loyalty, ego, punishment, and a political system starting to fracture under the weight of one man's instincts. For Donald Trump, power has never been about institutions or process. It has always been about submission, about loyalty offered upward without question. And that is why this moment matters so much. Because while Trump demands absolute loyalty from everyone around him, he has never believed in returning it. And now, finally, members of his own party are beginning to understand the cost of that imbalance. When Senate Republicans push back, when even the most hawkish voices hesitate, Trump doesn't hear policy disagreement, he hears betrayal. And betrayal to Trump is unforgivable. That's why the Greenland episode isn't really about land or minerals or strategy. It's about control, about Trump testing whether the party still flinches when he speaks. And for the first time in a long while, the flinch doesn't come. Mike Johnson steps in front of the cameras, insisting nothing is happening, insisting there's no war, no invasion, no crisis. But what he's really doing is trying to hold together a House majority so thin that a single crack could bring the entire structure down. And when he blames the media or Democrats for exaggerating Trump's own words, it's not messaging, it's damage control. The contradiction is obvious and dangerous at the same time, because Trump's legal argument to the Supreme Court is that tariffs are justified by national security, yet his allies claim there is no national security threat when it comes to Greenland, and both of those things cannot be true at the same time. This is where the Senate revolt begins to harden, not as a dramatic rebellion, but as something far more threatening to Trump, a collective realization. Rand Paul doesn't sound emotional when he says there is no Republican support for this. Even among the hawks, he sounds methodical, institutional, like someone reminding the system that it still exists. And that matters because Trump's power only works when people believe he is inevitable. Ted Cruz hedges, avoids full endorsement, talks around the issue instead of embracing it, and that hesitation alone sends a signal that Trump feels instantly. Then comes Bill Cassidy, and his story is the cautionary tale every Republican understands immediately. Because Cassidy did everything Trump demanded after impeachment. He humbled himself publicly. He voted in ways he knew were wrong. He chased approval that never came. And the moment he stopped being useful, Trump destroyed him politically without hesitation. That endorsement of Cassidy's primary challenger wasn't just revenge, it was a message. Loyalty to Trump is never protection. It's a delay. And watching that happen in real time forces Republican senators to confront a truth they've avoided for years. Trump will sacrifice any of them if it feeds his ego. This is where the collective action problem becomes clear, because Trump can bully individuals, but he struggles against groups, and history shows it. When Republicans move together, when resistance becomes shared, Trump loses interest, he gets distracted, he moves on, because sustained conflict requires discipline, and discipline has never been his strength. That's why Greenland, like the Epstein files before it, becomes another example of Trump overreaching, then retreating once the cost rises. And while this plays out on the international stage, the same pattern appears domestically through ICE, where power without accountability turns violent. And when voices like Ruben Gallego argue that more funding and more training won't fix an agency built on aggression and fear, they're not just critiquing policy, They're describing the natural outcome of Trump's governing philosophy. ICE becomes a reflection of Trump himself, unrestrained, unaccountable, protected by loyalists who refuse to see the damage because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging him. The debate over reform versus dismantling isn't rhetorical, it's fundamental, because you cannot tweak a system designed to intimidate, just like you cannot gently manage a presidency driven by impulse rather than principle. Trump governs by instinct, and when institutions resist those instincts, he attacks the institutions, the courts, the Senate, the media, even his own party, and in doing so, he isolates himself. By the end of this chapter, the real conflict is no longer hidden. The Senate revolt is no longer hypothetical, and Trump's greatest enemy is no longer Democrats. It is his inability to sustain loyalty in a system that finally understands what he really is, and that realization is only just beginning. The moment the Senate resistance becomes public, everything inside Washington shifts, because once dissent leaves private conversations and enters the record, it can no longer be contained. And Donald Trump feels that shift immediately, not as a policy problem, but as a personal threat to his authority, which is why his reaction is not strategic, but punitive, instinctive, and loud, lashing out at individuals rather than addressing the substance of the rebellion, a pattern that has defined his entire political life. Behind the scenes, Republican senators are having conversations they have avoided for years, quiet but urgent exchanges about survival, not ideology, because they now see the same thing Democrats have seen all along, that Trump does not protect allies, he consumes them, and once that realization sets in, fear begins to change direction. The House, meanwhile, is operating in a state of barely controlled panic because Mike Johnson knows something Trump does not. That numbers matter more than loyalty, and when margins are razor thin, even symbolic chaos becomes dangerous. Every time Trump floats another escalation, another tariff threat, another vague national security justification, Johnson sees not strength, but instability. And instability is poison for swing district Republicans who already feel the ground moving beneath them. This is why Johnson gaslights so aggressively, why he insists nothing is happening, even as everyone can see that something very clearly is, because admitting reality would force him to choose between defending Trump and defending the institution he leads, and he knows those two things are no longer aligned. In the Senate, that separation becomes clearer by the day, because resistance there is not emotional, it is procedural, rooted in constitutional language, statutory limits, and the kind of slow, grinding pushback that Trump finds impossible to counter. When senators talk about tariffs originating in the House, about emergency powers being abused, about courts stepping in, they are doing something Trump has always feared. They are moving the fight onto terrain.
सब माँ की आँख हीरो बनना चाहते हैं, लास्ट रील के लिए जीना चाहते हैं, आखिरी रील में घर बसेगा, माँ खुश होगी, लड़की मिलेगी, हैप्पी एंडिंग होगा। मैं वो हूँ जो पूरी फिल्म में सबकी माँ बहन करना चाहता हूँ, मजे लूटना चाहता हूँ। मुझे याद किए बिना तो अच्छे लोगों की मिसाल नहीं दी जाती। असलम विलन हूँ मैं, विलन।
नॉर्मली जब एक मूवी रिलीज होती है तो उसकी बस, हाइप और वो हिट होगी या फ्लॉप, ये काफी हद तक डिपेंड रहता है उस मूवी के हीरो यानी नायक पर। बट दुनिया भर की इंडस्ट्रीज में ऐसी कई फिल्में आई हैं जो उन फिल्म्स के विलेन यानी खलनायक की दम पर ब्लॉकबस्टर हुई हैं, और उन किरदारों ने नेगेटिव रोल भी इतना बखूबी निभाया है कि ऑडियंस को हीरो से ज्यादा विलेन का रोल याद रह जाता है। और आज हम रिसेंट बॉलीवुड मूवीज के ऐसे ही 5 दमदार विलेन परफॉर्मेंसेस की बात करने वाले हैं जिन्होंने अपनी एक्टिंग के दम पर नेगेटिव रोल निभाते हुए मूवीज को सुपर हिट बनाया है। नंबर 5, राकेश महाटकर इन एक विलेन। जून 2014 में आई फिल्म एक विलेन में मिस्टर रितेश देशमुख ने अपने इस नेगेटिव रोल से सबको शॉक कर दिया। इस फिल्म में मिस्टर रितेश एक ऐसे मिडिल क्लास आदमी का किरदार निभाते हैं जो अपनी वाइफ से बहुत प्यार करता है, बट इन रिटर्न सिर्फ गालियां खाता है। एंड उस फ्रस्ट्रेशन को दूर करने के लिए वो दूसरी महिलाओं को ब्रूटली एक स्क्रू ड्राइवर से। नॉर्मली अपने कॉमेडी और लाइट हार्टेड रोल के लिए जाने जाने वाले मिस्टर रितेश देशमुख ने अपने इस नेगेटिव रोल से मेन एक्टर एंड एक्ट्रेस को भी ओवरशैडो कर दिया। एंड इवन टुडे ये मूवी अपने गानों के बाद सिर्फ मिस्टर रितेश की परफॉर्मेंस के लिए ही याद की जाती है। एंड आफ्टर एक विलेन सक्सेस मिस्टर रितेश ने और भी नेगेटिव रोल्स किए, बट दिस वन इज स्टिल स्टैंड स्ट्रॉन्ग।
प्लीज प्लीज मुझे मत मारो, मुझे जीना है, मैं माँ बनने वाली हूँ। मुझे इस बच्चे को दुनिया में लाना है।